All right. Good afternoon in the West Coast time zone. I'm here today weekly with Johanna Thorn. Thank you so much always for being here and sharing my apprenticeship, her mentorship. It's one and the same out loud to the public because this was a private affair and we realized that part of our mission in life is for people to know how to do this. And so much of our own health, our own balancing, our own vibrancy of living is within our hands and in our foods. And I knew it peripherally, but I didn't really take advantage of it very much until I had to. And Joanna showed me the way. And so we've decided that for this episode, this is our third one now, that we want to go deeper into food combining and for balancing hormones as well as everything else. So, um, do you want to kind of just start from there, Joanna? Just like kind of
Sure.
how does food combining balance hormones to begin with?
Okay, perfect. So there's kind of actually two layers to how food really supports our hormones specifically. The first layer is more general that I'm going to start off with, and that is more focused on the actual food combining and like how to do that. And then there's a second layer that I'll just kind of briefly mention, remind me if I forget, of how you can actually take that to the next level with specific what's happening in our bodies depending on where we're at in our cycles. And this applies not only to women who still have a bleed, but also to perimenopause, in menopause, and postmenopausal as well. So this is across the board for all women. And so just to preface that too, when you actually have a bleed cycle, of course, you are following that specific cycle and looking to see where it's at in conjunction with the moon phase and the rest of the planetary cycles. When we are more in the menopause or postmenopausal phase, then at that point, we are just following the moon. And so what's recommended is new moon is day one. So new moon to full moon is the first part of the cycle, and then full moon back to the new moon is the second part of the cycle, just to give you some background on that. And so food combining. I focus a lot on how we put our foods together, when we eat certain foods, as well as where in the cycle that we're at, because it all plays a really key role. Now, I always tell clients, when we first start working together, it's not the end all or the be all. Like, you're not going to die if you don't follow these principles. And you could be thriving and living a much more vibrant life if you followed these principles. And if you found yourself in an acute situation where you had certain things arising for you, health challenges, issues, or, love notes, as I like to call them, and you've heard me refer to them before, then this is something that you would want to dial into to support you to move through whatever it is that was going on in the moment. And so basically, it's a little equation, it's a little mathematical equation. And I always encourage people to not make it more difficult than it's actually quite simple. But in our human, tendencies, we tend to like try and make it more complicated than it really is. So I'm going to try and just keep it really simple and just say whatever, tips and tricks you've also learned, or, bring me back to a certain point, then please do so. So the idea, the mathematical equation that we're using here is called the 5+5. And credit for this is not from me. I've expanded upon this and I've turned it into, a much bigger system per se. But the original 5+5 comes from Doc Wheelwright's research and work that he was doing when he was alive here and with us. And I learned this through my teacher and mentor, who studied directly with Doc Wheelwright. And so I studied and worked with Dr. Jack Tips, who we've spoken about in these episodes as well too. And his website is wellnesswiz, wellnesswiz.com. If you want to go check him out, there is a plethora of information there, and I highly recommend his newsletters for education and information. He's one of the top researchers out there, and can really, bring all that information together, that is really pertinent to all of us to be able to thrive in this era and this time period that we live in. And so this 5+5 equation comes from Doug Wheelwright. And what he broke it down into was 1 cooked and 4 raw. And so that equation works on both sides of the spectrum, the 5 and then the other 5. So on one side, we have, and we're only going to be focusing primarily on protein foods that are foods that our body recognizes as more protein foods in this particular discussion. And so on that side of the spectrum, we have 1 cooked and 4 raw. And this is the one that gets a little bit, that people tend to get a little bit tripped up on, because they're like, okay, I can get the 1 cooked protein, but what in the world is this 4 raw you're talking about here? So let's break that down a little bit. So cooked protein is pretty obvious. That is whatever is your main profile within your meal, and it's going to be cooked. So, that's where the meat, let's just say, comes in, or the animal foods at that point. And then you have the 4 raw. And it's like, okay, now how do we fill in these 4 raw category when it comes to, these protein foods? And so one of the simplest ways is to use foods that do double duty. And this is where sprouts and microgreens come in. So we can actually apply sprouts and microgreens on this end of the spectrum as microproteins in their raw form to support the digestion of the cooked protein. And that's really what this is all about, is being able to supply all of the specifics within the meal and the combination, so that your body has what it needs all within that meal and doesn't have to do the extra work of filling in the gaps. And that makes it so much easier on our digestive system, as well as being able to utilize a lot more of these nutrients as they're, going down the hatch, so to speak, as well too. And so that would be like, a variety of sprouts that has 4 different, sprout blends in it. So I make my own. I like to use alfalfa, broccoli, red radish, clover, and that's only 4. So there's 4 right there. You can buy them in the store. Like, they have these sandwich blends, these deli blends. You don't even have to do your own. And those have usually at least 4 of a variety in them. And so that's super easy. You just take a handful and put that with your meal, and it's done. So that's the simplest way to be able to utilize that end of the equation. Other things that would count as raw proteins also are, that's where your activated nuts and seeds come into play. That's where your raw grass-fed cheeses come into play. The made from raw milk yogurts and these type of foods that haven't been all processed, like the kinds in the store, because those really don't count. They have so much sugar in them, and they've been processed so much that the value that we're looking for is really not present within a lot of those foods. So it's something to just keep in mind as well too. And this is why I always encourage shopping, directly from local farms and small artisan food producers within your area. And there's more and more people who are doing all these things now. And so it might just take a little bit of looking around if this is all kind of new for you. But I'm willing to bet there's somebody doing something in your area that could really support you that you might not be aware of yet. And so on this raw, in this protein spectrum, we have 1 cooked, 4 raw. So we have the 1 cooked protein, and then we can just have that sprout blend, or the same with the microgreens, a blend of 4 different microgreens in there. Or we can actually, bring in some of the activated nuts and seeds, like I said, or some of these raw cheeses. And in my book, I actually give like a really big list of these types of foods so that you can begin to start that mental process of categorizing them for yourself, because this is not usually a way that we are used to thinking, for the most part. Sea veggies are also wonderful here. This is where I like to use raw and dried sea veggies as well too, as the additional raw proteins. That's something that can be brought in as well, or it can actually be like the cooked protein portion of the meal. So you can see that there's just so many variables and so many options here, and it's really a beautiful way to not feel restricted in our, and not feel like we're on a diet and, oh my God, I can only eat this or only eat that. So it opens up the whole spectrum, but in a way that actually really supports your body and doesn't cause more stress. Because that's the whole point here, is we're not looking to cause any more stress on the body and the systems in any way, shape, or form, because, we already have so much going on in our modern day lives. And so food shouldn't really be a stressor on our bodies as well too. Okay, so we've talked about the protein side of the category. So that's on the 1-5 side. So now what is the other 5? The plus part. So that part is actually all of the plant-based, but specifically veggies. And so same thing there. 1 cooked, 4 raw. Now you can have more than 1 cooked in the veggie portion. We don't necessarily recommend it in the protein category on a regular basis. But you can still have your bacon and your eggs, on occasion. And as long as you know how to put it all together in a way that doesn't cause you that extra stress, then again, you get to enjoy these things. And so the veggies is usually a lot easier part to be able to like sort out, because you just need 1 cooked and then the 4 raw. And again, if you want to keep things like super, super simple in the beginning, then this is where that double duty comes in. So those sprouts and microgreens that we were talking about that actually count as your 4 raw proteins, they can also count as your 4 raw veggies. So they get to do double duty. They fill both categories. And so that's why I always tell people, if you do nothing else and you take nothing else out of all of our work together, just keep this one habit of always adding a handful of sprouts or microgreens to every meal that you eat, and it will forever shift and elevate the quality of your life, even if you do nothing else. So if that's the only thing you get out of today's discussion, then, oh my God, you are in an amazing place to thrive, and just take that and run with it. So I really encourage you to, like I said, if that's the only thing you take out of this, just take that one piece and just keep that in and make that part of your routines and part of your habits as well, because it will really serve you on a huge level. And the reason for that also is not only is it, the microprotein that's helping the protein to be able to break down and digest by supplying, a balance of amino acids within that. Sprouts and microgreens also act like a digestive enzyme, because they're so full of enzymes, right? And it's like taking a multivitamin at the same time, because it's so full of nutrition. I mean, you think about sprouts and microgreens, like there are these seeds that have actually just started to come to life, right? So all of the nutrients and all of the enzymes and all of the components that they need in order to become a full plant and thrive are packed right into that little tiny bit right there. And so that's when they are really potent and really powerful, combined into our meals that way. And so, like I said, that's a very simple way to be able to cover both sides of the equation. Now, I also recommend, branching out from that as well too. And, that one of the easiest ways is to be able to combine some raw greens. This time of year, we have forage greens, we have wild greens, we have our domesticated greens. So, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, then there's a plethora of fresh, beautiful foods that are available to us right now. And some of the things too, like I just want to throw this out there, I see a lot of people eating raw kale, and I just want to throw it out there that that's not necessarily the best thing for your digestion. I know people are like, oh, well, if you marinate it in apple cider vinegar and start to break it down, then that helps. But what I've seen is that really puts a huge stress on the digestive system, and I'm willing to bet nobody has perfect digestion in this world these days. And so, why add in another layer of stress on your body? So, those kind of greens like the nettle, the collards, the kales, the thicker chards, and all of those. I do recommend like a quick steam on those, or I like to just do a quick saute with them
What
as well
about
too.
cabbage?
What's that?
What about cabbage?
Cabbage is okay raw, and you can do the raw or cooked. Again, depending on your digestion and where it's at, but that seems to be a little bit easier on the body. And again, it has to do with the nutrients and the anti nutrients that are being released at that time. As the food is being utilized, whether in its raw or cooked form, and that's something to keep in mind too. It's really important to cook and also eat raw as many of these veggies as we can, because you're getting completely different nutritional profiles from them in those two different states. And when I say cooked, I'm referring to more like lightly cooked, or in soups or stews, because at that point that they're cooking for a long period of time, but the nutrients are going into the liquid and going into the broth, and then you're consuming that. So that's okay. But it's not like you want to like boil the heck out of, your vegetables or anything like that. Just a very light steam or a light blanch, a light saute, or a quick stir fry. That is like the perfect way to be able to just begin that pre-digestion process, release the nutrients, and then make it more bioavailable at a deep cellular level. And so again, like I was saying, one of the, easiest ways to kind of think about that is, to have a salad basically. A salad doesn't always have to be greens. Like that's a nice, beautiful homemade slaw. In the summer, I love to do like a tomato and avocado and like cucumber salad with olives and a little bit of feta and some fresh dill, so there's like so many different ways that you can, you look at this. And that's the key too, is the variety and in season and local. So those are the parameters that we always wanted to be bringing in here. And so to recap on that, we have 5 plus 5. On one hand, we have the 1 cooked protein and the 4 raw proteins. On the other hand, we have the 1 cooked vegetable and the 4 raw vegetables. And now the largest portion on the plate is the vegetables. The protein is more the condiment. And so, we want to completely flip the plate around from what basic standard American and North American tradition is used to, where you have like this massive hunk of steak, on the plate with this huge pile of like, mashed potatoes or French fries or whatever. And like maybe like 2 little like boiled to death pieces of broccoli or something like that. Right. So scrape the plate clean. Let's start over again. We're going to take a quarter of that piece of meat, and that's going to be the protein portion. Now, this is the key piece too. When we are combining our nutrients this way, we don't need the larger quantity, because your body is able to utilize the amount that you're bringing in, especially in this way without stress. And so the rest of the plate, like 3/4 of that plate. And again, in my book, I actually give charts and percentages, and I break down the food plates and give examples as well too. So it just kind of helps to get a visual. But it's all the veggies and all the plant-based foods that are on there that are the largest portion of the plate. And that should be the case with any meal, whether you're following this advice in particular or not. The vegetable portion of your meal should always be the largest portion. And then anything else that you add in should always be the condiments or the smaller sides or whatever terminology you want to use, in order to be able to really facilitate you getting the prebiotics, the nutrients, the enzymes, and everything that is necessary for within the meal to be able to help us digest that and break that down. Okay, so that's kind of the first layer there. Did that make sense? Just say yeah.
Yeah, it does. And obviously, we're going to need more time to discuss like you said, that's the first layer. Because I'm thinking, okay, and then what about the hours in between? And then, if people did want to start thinking about what to eat during for each cycle, how to add in those supportive foods, how could they begin that?
Okay.
And by the way, this I Live Vibrantly, Johanna Thorn NC down below, that's the name of her book. And you can find that on Amazon, right?
Actually, the name of the book is not that. The
Isn't
name
that?
of the
Oh,
book is
good.
Live Vibrantly:
I
10
live
Steps to
vibrantly.
Maintain Youthfulness, Increase Your Energy, and Restore Your Health.
Okay.
Um, it's a long one. So what I recommend, no matter what, and it's hard to share a link because it's different, different Amazon depending on what country you live in. So just go to your local Amazon, type in my name, Johanna Thorn, and Live Vibrantly, and it will always come up. So first thing, you'll be able to find it that way.
Okay. All right.
So that's the reference to the book. And yeah, so let's make a note and we can continue this conversation and go a little bit deeper with this next week in our discussion as well too. And the second part of the layer that I just wanted to mention before we run out of time today is, now we've talked about the food combining, so we have how to put our meals together, and then there's also certain times of the day. And so very quickly, our bodies are primed to consume our protein earlier in the day, first thing in the morning, throughout the first part of the day. And so that's where you would be, combining these meals and having these meals in there. And then later in the day, that's where the starchier foods, can come in, because those are the foods that actually prime us and get us ready to go into that relaxation mode, kind of help our brains shut down, slow down, put us into rest and digest, and really prepare us for a good night's sleep. So that's a very quick reference in regards to timing.
And that's hard for a lot of people because it's like for me, I had to turn around to have dinner for breakfast, and I didn't want
Exactly.
to. I really didn't want to. It was a very difficult transition, but now it's good and fine. For anyone who's doesn't want to do it and was resistant or still wants their French toast and maple syrup, for breakfast.
Right.
So,
But again, it's about learning these principles and learning how to incorporate them into your life in a way that's really going to support you. And there are ways to still have your French toast, on occasion, right? But it's those little tiny things that you do every day, day in and day out, that are going to have the largest impact. And that impact can be positive or it can be negative. And that's the key to remember. And as with anything, even if it's good for you, if it's not used in moderation, balance, and used properly, it can become harmful for you. So that's something to keep in mind as well too. And don't be fooled by all of these, natural, healthy foods that are all these processed, prepped foods that are, being sold now these days. All this keto stuff and paleo stuff and all this, all these prepared and really highly processed foods that are being sold under the guise of healthy, nutritious food. So just really beware of that. Read labels. If it isn't just a bunch of like actual whole food ingredients and there's other stuff in there, put it back. It just doesn't belong on your plate. It's that simple. We've really got to really be very conscious and mindful these days, especially when we're grocery shopping and purchasing things, because we live in a world where there is actual real whole food available, and then there's all this lab manufactured food and all this processed food as well too. Now this processed and lab manufactured, I even hate calling it food because it's not. It just isn't, and your body
what
isn't
we
going
put
to
in our mouth
respond to it.
and it goes
Yeah,
through the body and we poop it out. Or not,
exactly.
or it stays too long in our body because it can't digest it, right?
Right. And also some of those, compounds that are in these lab foods and processed foods are things that our body doesn't even recognize and doesn't even know what to do with. So it doesn't even get processed. It gets stored as a toxic waste in our fat cells.
Right.
And especially as women, that is a huge, huge issue. and plays a big role in, weight gain and being able to keep our weight in a healthy, balanced state. And especially for perimenopausal and menopausal women, that is a huge problem. And it can actually lead to, a bigger imbalance. And this is what I talk about in our whole estrobolome series as well, too. Because, once we start getting into those realms, that's where we get into the estrogen dominance and the hormone disruption. And that's leading to a whole slew of other problems, as well as postmenopausal, estrogenic cancers, especially breast cancer. So there's so many layers, to all of these pieces. And I know these quick little bites, it's like really hard. So I'm just hopefully throwing little things out there to get you thinking and get you curious. And will want to take a deeper dive for your own self, to be able to support yourself.
Well,
And
we are gonna have to hit those other layers, but maybe like you could just give just a brief description of the last few layers, and to just circle around with how the food combining for balancing the hormones. So I feel like today you restated like the foundation of the food combining, which is the majority of vegetables on your plate, the protein being smaller, the 5+5 aspect, right? And so I guess could you just kind of bring that around as how that will balance hormones
yeah.
and the other pieces?
So yeah, the next piece I was going to bring in was that, within our different phases of our cycle, there's the 4 phases, right? And so within those 4 phases, there are specific foods that supply specific nutrients that are extra supportive, shall we say, within that phase. And the reason for that is because they are triggering specific hormone actions in our body and feeding into specific cycles, right? And so, there's times when we want to be supporting more estrogen in our bodies. And then there's times where we want to support more progesterone in our bodies. And this is the beauty of food, is we can actually use the foods that we eat combined in this way to support those specifically. And I'm only, I'm only isolating estrogen and progesterone right now, but it's so much bigger than that. But those are kind of the 2 predominant ones that most people talk about within, our cycles and within balancing the hormones and whatnot. And so, like I said, that there's a whole, bigger web here. But these 2 in particular, it's really easy to be able to, support that. So if, you have too much estrogen in the wrong part of your cycle, that's not going to serve you well. In so many different ways. It can manifest as like gut issues, inflammation, anxiety, really difficult menstrual cycles, cramping, mood swings. I could just go on and on and on and on. So it really plays a key role in helping us to be able to, balance things. And one example that I like to use, I'll give you an example, is soy foods, right? So over the years, soy foods have gone, they're good, they're bad, don't eat them, eat them. Yeah, it's just been all over the map, right? When I was studying nutrition way back when, like over 20 years ago, that was when they were just beginning to be like, people are eating too much soy, especially women, and it's really messing with the hormones, right? And so that was when these started being spoken about, shall we say. And so, we want to have those certain foods like soy in the right place in the cycle. So it's not like you can never eat them, but just know that if you eat them, this is the action that's going to happen in the body, and it is supporting estrogen as opposed to progesterone. And so you would want to eat them within a very specific part of the phase. And I'm not even going to go into detail about that, because we can go into another class where I would actually like to just kind of walk you through each phase, share some of those foods with you that can be supportive. So maybe next week we can, go into that, where we can go into more detail about these specific layers and when at certain times of the month you want to be focusing on specific foods to be able to support that hormone balance. And then, another layer to that too, as I briefly mentioned, prebiotics, right? So in the world of biotics, there's three categories. We have pre, pro, and post. Now, most people are familiar with probiotics because, that's been, broadcasted all over the place for many, many years now. But what science is finally putting out there is, and, kind of what we've known in the natural health world all along, is that a lot of these supplements are really not supporting you and are an absolute waste of money. Because if you don't have the prebiotics, which combine with the probiotic to create the postbiotic, then it's an absolute waste. And then also, too, if you're taking the same probiotic formula over and over and over and over and over again, that's monoculture. And without the prebiotic, they're not going to stay in your body. They're not taking up residence. They're just moving through. And
Well,
that doesn't
because the
serve you.
prebiotic is the food for the probiotic. That's
Exactly.
right, which then creates the postbiotic, which is exactly the same as the soil.
Exactly.
It's the poop loop. And each time it goes through that cycle, the soil gets richer and richer, and it seems to really be the same in our gut.
Exactly. It is. I mean, we can liken, that's why I always say we're a personal ecosystem. And I always liken it to, farming and gardening and all of that, because we're a duplication of what's going on out there. Right. And the same principles apply. And, the postbiotic is the sweet spot where we get the benefit of these, these bacterias. And again, there's specific bacteria for the brain. There's specific bacteria for our guts. There's specific bacteria for each hormone, not just the hormones as a group. There's, specific for each one. Every function in our body has a specific, you know, oh my gosh, I just completely lost my thought.
Each nutrient has a specific, connection or correlation with different organs and systems in our body.
Thank you. Yeah. So, it's not as simple as, oh, just take this one strain and we're supporting everything. It
Right.
doesn't work that way. It's very detailed. And this is why I teach the food combining as I do, because within that component, we only talked about, the one cooked and the four raw, but within that plate, especially if you look in my book, you'll see there's the healthy fats that need to be in there as well too. We need those fats to keep our hormones balanced. We need the cultured foods or the fermented foods to be able to support this ecosystem, within our bodies. And then we need the specific foods to create these prebiotics, right? And so there's this whole layering of food, really, that supports every one of these functions in our body. And that's where it gets really exciting and it gets really fascinating when you start to break down into all the areas, everything that can be done. But, a lot of the times, you might just want to keep it simple. You don't really want to know what is going on every little single layer, or you don't have the time to learn that right now. So just know that if you are, using some of the principles we've talked about today by using the sprouts and the microgreens, you are in effect actually really supporting yourself to be able to have these nutrients, the and the pro, to make the post, along with all of the amino acids and the vitamins and the enzymes and everything that we need in order to be able to function and thrive at a human level in this planet today.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm so excited to just go down. There's so many layers from this. This is like really such a great umbrella. And, like you said, from today, bare minimum, start adding sprouts or microgreens into every meal. And just knowing that they are great enzymes, digestive enzymes, and giving you a lot of just great micronutrients. And then from there, if you can consider with your meals to have more vegetables than protein, switch the idea in your head that we were fed about the food pyramid. And then if you're having like various issues, digestive anxiety, off balance, or anything like that, considering some of these other details that we'll give, but to just start by eating more vegetables, um, and just thinking about how you can put less stress on your body, because that was something I didn't even realize or consider or know, that just simply the foods that we're combining or the foods that we're eating are causing a lot of stress. And just because it doesn't stress someone out now doesn't mean it won't later, but we're all so uniquely different. I was able to eat and do everything I did until I couldn't. That may not happen to the next person, or it may not be happening to them now, but it's like, um, it's such a great tool to know, oh, okay, how about I just decide on one protein? Because sometimes I had no idea. I was like, had five, and that the nuts sprouted, that causes stress when you're already in distress.
Right.
So, well,
And that's a key piece too, because there is so much stress in our just lives in general. Living in this time period there is a lot more stress than even 10 years ago.
yeah,
Right. And so that really takes its toll on our bodies.
right,
And so our bodies are calling out to us to support them at a deeper level so that they can handle all of these other stressors. Right. So the last thing we need to do is put more stress on our body while we're trying to nourish our bodies to support us to deal with all of this stress happening in our lives. And so, that's why I always start off with the food as the foundation
yeah,
in the first place. And then we begin to work on the other layers, because it's not just the food.
yeah.
It's not the end all or the be all, but it plays a huge role. So it gets a lot of attention. But there's so many other pieces and elements to this, which we will be working our way through as we have these conversations. So stay tuned.
Yeah, definitely. Stay tuned. And I just have to say that, like, I feel that so strongly, and I share it with people when they're in a painful situation, that I could share my experience, which is like, if you're in a stressful place, do everything you can to at least eliminate the stress on your liver. And you can do that just simply through the food, because it needs to filter out all of the other, like the mental stress, the hormonal, the pollution and everything. So it's really such a cool thing to, it's an empowering tool, like that
Definitely.
I didn't even know. And I lived in a natural living sort of, situations, and went to Whole Food stores and stuff. Um, Not Whole Foods, but actual
Yeah.
Whole Foods
Like real
stores.
food store and farms.
Yeah, exactly. And it was such a great reminder that there are ways that we can just not stress it as much. Like,
Exactly.
so
If we can lighten the load as much as possible,
right
then it gives us more ability to be able to handle the other things, right? Without taking such a huge toll. And especially, um, when you're living with family and you're living with people, or you're living in a community, it's like there's all these dynamics going on, in the family situation. You've got, parents, children, and there's always all these external, pieces coming. And I really see the difference when, even just like I said, that the simple thing of combining the sprouts with the meal, I have seen dynamics just completely shift and things become more manageable just by that one simple act. And so just really encourage you. I mean, can't hurt you. Just try it. Literally try it for 3 weeks
right.
and then see what you think.
That's a, yeah, great suggestion. Because as you said last week or the week before, there are no parts and pieces. It's all connected and affected.
Yeah.
So, well, I can hardly wait till next week, because I have so many more questions and I'm so excited. So, but we'll end it here for now. And of course, anyone who's listened now or later, always feel free to reach out to us on any social media platforms.
Yeah.
Um,
Send us your questions. If this is raising questions for you, you're getting curious, or you're reading the book and you have questions, just pop it in the comments or DM one of us directly. And, we're happy to work your questions into the conversations as well, because that's the whole point. Is we're here to support all of you and to get you curious. And give you ways to be able to support yourself, to just, live a much more vibrant life, and one that's just full of more ease and grace, really, ultimately, is what it boils down to. And that allows us to just be instead of like doing all the time as well. And that's our bodies. Our bodies need time to just be and not be doing. all the time. So it applies all the way across the board there.
Hmm. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much. And till next week, everybody.
Thank
Ciao.
you. Bye.